Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to the Castle Dracula Horror Movie Podcast. On this podcast, we talk about horror movies, vampire movies, and all-around awesomeness. And this week, we celebrate 50 episodes. This is literally our 50th published, episode of the Castle Dracula Podcast. And for this event, we've chosen to look at John Badham's 1979 Dracula, starring Frank Langella. Now, bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to talk about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the Alex Van Helsing series from HarperCollins and the upcoming game Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows from Activision. With me are Drew Edwards, the creator of the long-running horror webcomic Halloween Man, which you can find at halloweenman.com. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
Tony Salvaggio, creator of the Victorian mech comic Clockworks, coming this spring from Humanoids and hardback, also of the manga Psycom from Right Stuff and Tokyopop, and lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
And, as always, with color commentary, attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello, Julia.
Hello.
And Julia is also the host of a new podcast on mom stuff called Pod Moms, which I love. Okay. Amazingly enough, in 1979, there were 3 major Dracula releases in the movie theaters. There was Werner Herzog's Nosferatu, which we've done an episode on. I encourage you to listen to it as a companion of this. There was also a parody movie starring George Hamilton called Love at First Bite, which we're going to get to soon, this year. And this, Dracula, from Universal Studios. So Dracula is a 1979 American-British horror film starring Frank Langella as Count Dracula. The film was directed by John Badham, cinematography by Gilbert Taylor, and a score by John Williams. And it also had Laurence Olivier as Professor Van Helsing, Donald Pleasance as Jack Seward, Kate Nelligan as Lucy Seward, Trevor Eve as Jonathan Harker, Tony Haygarth as Milo Renfield, and Jan Francis as Nina Van Helsing, because they mixed all the names up. And it won the 1979 Saturn Award for the Best Horror Film. So I am excited to talk about this. I want to hear your first impressions. Let's go, Drew, Tony, Julia, and Jason. Drew, first impressions, Frank Langella in Dracula.
This is a movie that I feel like is often overlooked. This is the example I always give. You know, that when adapting something, you don't necessarily have to be slavish to the text to get a good end result. This is a very stylish, provocative version of Dracula, and all very, very strong cast, and just a gorgeous-looking movie. And pretty much anytime anybody talks about Universal horror, I always feel like this is the movie that is not brought up for some reason, and it's such a great, not just great entertainment, but, I feel like as far as, like, the character of Dracula himself, it's one of the more thought-provoking versions of the character.
Wow, thank you. Okay, thought-provoking and unknown Universal. Tony, first impressions, Dracula?
I don't know what I could say other than what Drew said. It is really, like, I don't watch it for a while, and then I watch it, and I'm like, oh, man, there's so much good stuff, and it's so weird because they change so much, but it just works. Like, it's not often that you can just, and these people are gonna be here, and the castle's gonna be there, and you do all of that, and it's still just like it all works together, and it's awesome. So, yeah, every time I watch it, I forget how cool it is and enjoy it again.
Julia, what are your first impressions of Dracula, 1978?
Well, I don't love it as much as these guys seem to, but I did enjoy it. I think it's a good film. There's definitely a few things where I was kind of like, huh? Wait, what happened here? What's going on? And then the thing with the names being inverted is very off-putting. But I think it's enjoyable. It's definitely very 70s, especially like the Langella hair, that kind of thing. But I think they do a good job of not making it overly 70s. There's just a few little things here and there that kind of make you go, yep. But it's a good film. I look forward to talking about it.
I want to get into when we go a little bit farther about what you mentioned about the switching around of the names, because it can be really bizarre for somebody who's watched a lot. I think that's what Tony was kind of referring to, that and a bunch of other stuff. Okay, so my first impressions, I think this is one of the great Dracula films, and the reason I say that is, in theory, the cliche of the definition of a great movie is that there are 3 great scenes and no bad ones, at least 3 great scenes. And this movie gives you that. There are a whole bunch of moments in this movie where you're like, wow, that was very cool. And there are no scenes, there's one that skirts close, but there are no scenes where you're like, I'm done, this movie's an embarrassment, I can't watch it again. This is a great Dracula film. I haven't gone back to it a lot, and the funniest thing was the first time I did a big Dracula event for one of the sort of Dracula comics, we showed this at the Alamo Drafthouse in Austin, and I remember people coming up to me and going, that movie completely just escaped my radar. I wasn't even aware it was there. So it's funny that this was a major release in '79, and it's almost forgotten. So let's get right into talking about Frank Langella himself. So this guy's 41 years old, and he's playing Dracula. And so I want to throw out to the group, how does he compare to the other Draculas we've seen, and what distinguishes him? If you're listening to this and you don't care about being spoiled, what the heck is Frank Langella as Dracula? Joy, you want to go for it?
I don't think he's as sexy as some people might think. I was kind of joking with Jason because at one point there's suddenly there's a castle full of candles, and Jason's commented that Dracula had gone all Bo Brady because Bo Brady's character on Days of Our Lives is constantly has always done these ridiculously romantic things like filling a forest full of Christmas lights or a room full of candles. And so I said, and I'm suddenly attracted to him. I don't know what happened. And he goes, well, it is Frank Langella. And I'm like, no, it's definitely the candles because Frank Langella doesn't really do it for me, especially with the giant hair. But I think he's great. I mean, he's just got such a commanding presence when he enters the room, and just like the whole way he composes himself. And I love that they don't have the bloody fangs. I mean, he doesn't even wear fangs in this film, and he never has the bloody fangs. He never has. There's none of that gore. It's just very mysterious, kind of elegant thing. He seems to be super magical because literally right after Mina says to Lucy that she's so brave, Mina's going out to venture out to the ship to see what happened why this ship is suddenly washed ashore. And I mean, I'm like, that's talk about brave. I mean, she's just going to go do this by herself. But I think it has to be that he's already from there kind of luring her out of the house because
it seems to
otherwise
have a magnetic.
It doesn't make any sense for her to go out there.
Yeah, he can. You were going to say something, Drew.
Well, it's funny, this is often the Dracula that people mention is is so sexy because, I watched this last night with Jamie, who had never seen it before, and she thought he was incredibly disturbing and creepy. The whole time. She was like, he never blinks. And I get that I get that he is very suave and he's very charming and almost sort of like a Lord Byron type figure. But at the same time, I always kind of he's almost like a Nazi in some ways because he seems to have this undercurrent of being a vampire supremacist. He's like, yes, we're up here on the food chain and humans are down here. And
there's no doubt about that. Yeah, he is all powerful. The way he's like, this is what I do. I destroy everything in my path. He's a force of nature. He's not
even trying to hide, really.
No.
He doesn't really ever try to blend in as human. He's just, either they're going to find me out, and if that's the case, I'll just destroy them, or, they'll fall from my axe, and, all is well.
Yeah.
He's really one of the toughest Draculas I've ever seen. I mean, mind you, I don't know. I think that Jack Palance is probably more of a bruiser Dracula, but this guy, Frank Langella falls right in the middle. People do remember him as being this romantic Dracula because there is this romance story, but in it, sort of, where he's going to win Lucy over to his side, but.
Well, he's still a user. It's less romantic when you think of it. Like, for him, it's like, I'm going to take advantage of this as much as I can for as long as I can. And you get the impression as soon as he's done with her, that's it.
There are these moments when he comes in, when he arrives at the house, and he does it with this sort of flourish. I remember him like whipping off. He whips off his cape and tosses it to some minion who's helping out in the house of Dr. Seward, and he comes down and he's suave and he's very European and he's very regal and he's very arrogant. And I think one of my favorite things about him is that as powerful and tall and everything as he is, he's also extremely funny. He's sort of constantly throwing off these little witticisms that are only funny if you think of Dracula as being a vampire. So that he'll, he does the "I never drink wine" line, but he does it in this really great sort of understated way. He's sort of constantly just sort of making these sort of comments, like when Mina says, "Oh, I like to be scared," and he turns to her and goes, "Do you?"
Yeah, he's like aware. He's like, well, if they catch on, it's not a big deal because he's so powerful. Like, he does all the stuff. Like, he summons someone to the ship as it's wrecking to hey, come out. Like, I need some woman to come find me. And he finds somebody right there. And you're just like, wow. And just constantly throughout, he's doing something where you're like, this Dracula takes nothing. Like, he takes no guff from anybody.
I love the undercurrent of how animalistic he is under this high society veneer too, because when they're about to toss him off the ship, all you have is this roaring coming from his coffin, and then this hand, and they never put any prosthetics on him, so it's just a hand, but it's like a claw, and it comes out and it tears the guy's throat out. And he the fact that he never blinks and the way he uses his fingers, he is, even though he's, again, very suave, very princely, but he's still he's also this beast too. So it's a great contradiction.
It's awesome too, because anytime he gets into trouble, he's just like, well, I'm turned into a wolf and either destroying things or running away.
And also a bat. He's turned into a wolf or a bat.
Yeah, and the bat's a little hokier, but
the
wolf is
bat. True. Well, I like that when he turns into a wolf, then when he comes back, he's got this wolf coat on. It's awesome.
That's so cool. Yeah. But when he's changing too, he has those awesome they Foley in that's just just growls this is what I'm gonna do, and anything that's in my way is getting ripped up. It's really
it's
effective.
funny to me to think this is the first let's see, Christopher Lee had been playing Dracula since 1958, and we watched Dracula with Christopher Lee, and we talked about how sort of he was really urbane and then funny and then sexy and then a dangerous guy. And this Christopher Lee played that part all the way to 1973. So this is coming out only 6 years after the last Christopher Lee movie came out. It's being made. That means 5 years after the last Christopher Lee movie came out. I mean, how do you think this Dracula compares to the most recent one that had been seen on the screen at the time?
It's definitely less of a B movie.
That's true. Yeah, this is it's like they let it rest for 5 years, and then they decide, well, we're going to do Dracula again, but we're going to make it really big. We're going to have stars from all over the place. We're going to spend a lot of money on sets. We're going to have a new script, although actually it's based on an existing play. And but okay, I'll try and answer my own question. My take. I think Langella is very much in line with Christopher Lee. I think there's really only a few major interpretations of Dracula out there, and I think Langella has a lot of the same sort of athletic leapiness that just to make up a word that Christopher Lee had, where both of them brought on that sort of they're predators. When you're talking to this guy in a controlled environment that you're still talking to a predator who's just barely on the edge of exploding. I love that he's. Go ahead.
Also, he's really composed. So even when he knows Van Helsing has found him out, he's like, you're really clever. But what he really means is, you're really clever for a human.
Yes.
And and he treats it that way, and it's really he's he kind of has this begrudging not that many people find me out this way, So kudos to you, but you're still just food or.
Well,
That's another scene with a lot of real wit about it. When Van Helsing, we'll get to Van Helsing in a sec, but when Van Helsing has figured Dracula out, Dracula comes to visit him, and he goes, Van Helsing says, I was just looking at you in the mirror. And Dracula, throws a candlestick and crushes the mirror. And so it's like, wham! And then he says, I just like mirrors, pardon me.
Exactly. He's totally found out. But he's yeah.
What I was thinking in terms of what you were saying about the, that all the humans are sort of inferior. I mean, that goes right to the end where they're fighting, and basically, he's kicking everybody's butt. There's no obvious good guys are going to win in this movie. You really kind of worry there at the end where that everyone's going to end up dead except and Dracula's going to, which he does. There isn't to skip to the end and spoil it for everyone. It isn't clear that he's actually gone forever. He's just been a little bit sunburnt and then drifts off into the sky. But yeah, I was saying the good guys are not winning in this battle at the end. He's definitely putting in his. It's not a weak Dracula, let's put it that way.
So before we skip to the end, and by the way, when you say weak Dracula, I keep wanting to go back to Gary Oldman, who I felt wasn't ever able to nail this quite.
No.
I feel like Gary Oldman wasn't.
Part, but not this
but he was too much. To an extent, he was too much of a lover in 1992. Yeah. Well, what I mean is
he wasn't. I agree that he was weak, but I don't think he was a good very. I don't know. Whatever. I just didn't think.
I thought he wasn't
very sexy.
He was intended to be a very sexy sort of, I don't know, kind of foppish Dracula.
But they made him so ugly.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are problems with the way that, as we talked about in that episode.
There's plenty of handsome Draculas, and that's not one.
George Hamilton, actually.
Well, and Frank Langella is not traditionally, conventionally good-looking. His sex appeal comes a lot from just how he's playing this character. Is confident to the point of arrogant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this huge sort of magnetism. All right. So Dracula, in the beginning, Dracula, as you mentioned, arrives on a ship, and the people on the ship are trying to toss his coffin over because they sense that he's bringing,
Well, he's already killed someone.
He's killed a bunch of people. He's been eating people on the ship all the time, and so we come in on this ship that is going to wreck on the rocks. And I can only assume it's because Dracula wants it to wreck on those rocks because he wants to wind up right here at Whitby, which is near his house. And so he is, he's killing people even in his coffin. And he winds up on the beach discovered by Mina. So early on we meet the two main females, Lucy and Nina, who are the names of the two main characters that we encounter in essentially every Dracula movie that we've seen, except for that they are swapped. Did this confuse anybody for a moment or two?
For sure.
Yeah, it's Mina. Okay, so just to recap, in the book generally, you have Mina is the resolute one, the modern girl, the one who Dracula ends up really fixating on because she's so intelligent and witty and stuff. And Lucy is usually the sort of flighty sophisticate who is going to get married and has lots of suitors and is the sexy one, who Dracula dallies with first and always attacks first. In this movie, for no reason that I can tell, the names are completely swapped, but the characters remain more or less the same. Now, Mina's Lucy, Lucy is Mina. If you're not all that familiar with Dracula, everything I just said is deeply confusing. So we're going to keep them straight in this movie. Lucy's the strong one, Mina's the sexy one. And, and they've also done this further thing that most of these movies don't do, which is that they've collapsed all the characters of the book into one, quarter-mile radius. Dracula is coming to their house.
Yeah, it's not in London at all.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's in Whitby, which is where, I don't know a great deal about Whitby, although I think it's where the ship put in in the book. And there's a lot of stuff that keeps coming in from the book, but basically this movie has collapsed everybody. You've got Jack Seward, who's always a character among the ghost hunters, is now an older doctor, and he's the father of Lucy. And Mina is actually Mina Van Helsing, and she's the daughter of Dr. Van Helsing. And that leaves, we've got Jonathan Harker, who is Lucy's fiance, and he's the lawyer who has been
that character is so like completely invisible in this movie. Like I don't even remember that character at all, the Jonathan Harker character. Whereas in other films, he's been like a really prevalent, important character.
Well, they also send him away for a good chunk of it too, just because.
Yeah, well, and plus Lucy supposedly engaged to him, but there's never an indication that when Dracula starts seducing Lucy that there's anything inappropriate or
what are you talking
odd about her being with him as opposed to I don't mean with him as a vampire, but with him as opposed to her fiance. Like I don't remember there being anything about her fiance.
He's sitting there shooting her like Dracula and them a death stare when they're dancing together. He's very obvious.
Yeah, no, I don't mean that Jonathan doesn't care. I'm saying that she, even though she doesn't seem to be so hypnotized by him, like doesn't seem like she's in a trance, but she's dancing with him like it's all okay. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like she never pretends like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this, but I'm drawn to you. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, hey, let's go date. You know?
I think these are some of the best bits in the whole movie.
What?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think that's just part of how Dracula is in this movie. He's like, hey, by the way, Dracula's in town.
He's like Spawn. It's like Spawn.
Oh, did I take your fiance? Oh, man, this is what I did.
It's like Spawn. He just has to snap, and women come to his side.
Yeah.
Well,
it is a
that
wonderful
is kind of the essential aspect of, I think, just about any version of Dracula is why you would not like the guy. Is he's the guy that will hit on your girlfriend when you're right in front of you.
Right.
Like that is a big part of Dracula in popular culture, I think.
Him and Superman from the last Superman movie that came out.
That's right. It's like, I'm back, and I want Lois Lane back.
Oh, by the way, thanks for taking care of my kid. Here I go. I'm Superman. Are you Superman? No. And the Dracula, that's what I kept thinking of. He's the same kind of thing. Like, oh, hey, oh, man, she's your fiance? Oh, are you Dracula? Oh, that's too bad, because I am.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful, though, the scene we're all talking about, really, is probably like the finest scene in the entire movie, I'm going to say, until I get to another movie where I sit.
There was a scene I like better.
This dinner scene, the first dinner scene where Dracula comes to have dinner with Dr. Seward because he's moved into the castle next door, which is supposedly an abbey, but it's really just a big Dracula castle. He moves in
Carfax Abbey, and then of course the whole movie I kept going, get the Carfax. I could not do that.
I've been so familiar with that word Carfax Abbey for so long that it never even dawned on me that there's a company out there called Carfax. But which actually makes me now very afraid to send them information about my car. Is that they're but so he comes to dinner and he's so suave. There's this moment where let's see, first Mina's been sick because he's been drinking her blood, and so he they say, oh, let's give her some drugs, and he goes, no, don't give her any drugs, we mustn't pollute her blood, and then he sort of hypnotizes her, and that's really awesome, and Lucy thinks that's fantastic. And so then they have music, and Lucy asks him to dance, and he, in the name, in a sense of, I think, calling back to vampires always preferring to have you call them, he goes, well, I hardly know you, and she goes, oh, don't be silly, and so they dance, and it is this very, very romantic dance that makes Harker totally uncomfortable. But let's face it, even if he's not a vampire, he is a count. I think Harker's in trouble really the moment Lucy is
Well,
remotely interested.
this version of Jonathan Harker is quite possibly the biggest weenie in the history of lame-ass Jonathan Harker.
Yeah, I would
like
agree.
he is like every time something scary happens, he's like, Professor, and he's calling on what I don't know how old Laurence Olivier was when he made this movie, but he's pretty freaking old. And
well, he was really sick when he was making the movie. Really sick.
Yeah, and so the fact that your savior is a little old man, and that's like, it just makes him look like such an extreme wuss. Like, I have no sympathy for Jonathan Harker in this movie.
You know what it reminds me of? There's this movie where one of the beach movies, one of the Frankie and Annette movies. I was watching all of them recently, just as research for a Sea Monster project. But I was watching all the Frankie Annette movies, and there's this one where Frankie Avalon puts on a sort of reddish blonde wig and a mustache and pretends to be basically this geeky, foppish Beatle kind of character. And he's sort of a mixture of John Lennon and some random British Benny Hill kind of guy. And this guy looks and acts just like the character that Frankie Avalon did in that. I've got to figure out which beach movie that was, because they all run together. But yeah, he reminded me of Frankie Avalon as a wuss. But
I want to say back to the kind of the romance between Dracula and Lucy is that my favorite scene is the James Bond opening scene, where suddenly you're in this, like, at first you're in kind of a 70s music video, and there's smoke and there's all this lighting and stuff, and she's in her silky nightgown, and they start to to make out, and then as they're whatever they're doing, I don't know if they're making love or if it's just him biting her neck, but suddenly it becomes total James Bond opening with the red lights and the silhouettes and the smoke and everything, and then and apparently Jason told me that that's because the director is the guy who does the James Bond opening.
Well, the director of that sequence,
yeah.
that sequence is when, Dracula invites Lucy over, and he disinvites Harker in a brilliant way, where he goes, I need you to go to London and file some papers for me. Oh, and tell, Lucy and her dad to come on over. I wish you could join us, but I guess you got to go to London.
Bummer for you.
Oh, yeah, I love it. What I love is at this point he's so got her under his thumb that she's like, oh, no, it's no big deal. I'll totally go to Dracula's castle.
Yeah.
No one's going to go along with her, and she has and this is, I think, kind of, again, what you were talking about, Julia, where it was like, no one, she at no point is like, oh, man, I have a fiance. Maybe this is a bad thing. She's like, nope, Dracula said come up there, I guess.
Exactly.
That's what I do. And
and nobody else seems to be bothered by that either. I mean, the father, that's the thing is that, one of the reasons I don't completely 100% just love this movie is because some of the characters act really weirdly. When they send in, is it Jonathan? Who goes in with, no, it's Van Helsing, right? Who goes in, Jason, with Lucy when she's in the asylum, when she's locked up in the asylum? Is it Jonathan?
Oh, well, they send Harker in by himself.
Yeah, right. So Jonathan goes in by himself with Lucy, and I'm just like, they already know she's a vampire. They're armed with crosses and garlic outside the door, and they send Jonathan without any of that stuff by himself.
Yes.
And I was
maybe
that doesn't make any sense.
Jonathan. Everybody,
maybe
that's the key. At this point, we're seeing everybody's tired of Jonathan. His fiance is like,
they were hoping she was going to eat him.
His fiance is like, man, I am so glad a Dracula showed up because I did not want to get married to this guy. And then he's a weenie, and then everybody else, the father's kind of like, well, he is a Dracula, but. And then Helsing's the only one who's like, well, maybe he'll make good bait.
Julia, we were talking about the scene where Harker actually goes early on to visit Count Dracula, I guess to hand over papers or whatever he's doing. I can't remember. And so he walks into Carfax Abbey, and it has, again, I've never seen an abbey like this. Maybe I haven't spent enough time in abbeys, but it has this huge sort of weird face arch wall and a giant sort of winding staircase. And Harker goes in and goes, "Hey, Count!" And the Count sort of pops up behind the stone wall.
And he's like, peekaboo.
He just tapped him on the wrong shoulder. That would have been awesome. Tapped him on the opposite shoulder so he does the thing where he looks like, oh, there you are. I love that set, by the way. The Abbey set is awesome.
Yeah, that's
it is
so
a great
cool.
set. It just like you mentioned James Bond, just like the Fort Knox and Goldfinger, the set owes nothing to reality and everything to awesomeness. It is
right, like that
simply
beautiful spider web that they shoot through at one point. It's so cool.
Yes.
It's like a big spiral spider web.
And it's so crazy.
And to your point, that scene.
The mansion,
I'm sorry.
They move all the mansion to an asylum. So there's like the asylum and then the upper quarters where, and again, it's a very classist movie, which is really interesting because they play off of that. Like, Renfield shows up and basically everybody's like, hey, lower class guy. Mm-hmm. And he's griping about that. But it's all about this. A lot of the movie is this stratification, which and they physically do that. Like, Dracula's castle is above everything, and below that is wherever the nice part of the asylum is, which is really weird. And then down below
it's the house. Seward has a private residence, a very big private residence.
Huge.
That literally is, and then the bottom couple of floors and maybe subterranean parts are this asylum.
Which is and it's almost like the prison in Aliens 3. Like, it's just crazy, or Thunderdome, like kind of place, and it's really.
And both of these things are perched right on the edge of a cliff, looking down on the ocean. Go ahead, Drew.
Am I the only one that that likes to imagine that Dr. Seward in this movie is an ancestor of Dr. Loomis from Halloween?
Yes.
Oh.
Well, the funny thing is that's actually why he didn't accept the role of Van Helsing, was because he thought it was too much like Dr. Loomis.
Well, Dr. Loomis is basically a contemporary Van Helsing. I mean, there's a lot of truth in that statement.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
that's what I'm saying. He didn't want to be typecast.
He's not that much different in the role that he plays,
But they offered him that role. They offered him the Van Helsing role, and he said no because he didn't want it to be too much like Loomis.
It's funny because you mentioned that, and this is only a year after Halloween.
Yeah.
I suppose that Halloween was just such a runaway success that Donald Pleasance, already people know him as that guy.
Maybe he was just like, I've already done that role.
The guy that chases monsters, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's fair. Well, but he would have made such a fantastic Van Helsing. In fact, let's talk about. So Van Helsing shows up after Mina. Mina slowly loses blood until one day she just sort of she dies really terribly.
And then, what I don't get about Mina, I just want to ask a question of you vampire experts, is how come when she does, and I knew you were getting to this, but when she does, reveal herself as a vampire, which is awesome scene, just awesome. But anyway, how come they stab her, but then later on they decide they had to take out her heart? It's not enough that they stabbed her through the heart with the stake.
Oh, I think that's just something they decided to do. I mean, traditionally you would stab them, cut the head off, put that in running water or whatever you're going to do, and then separate the head and the body somehow, and try to burn it or put it in water.
There's a million variations. I've even heard even deeper variations than that, where you would have to stake the heart, cut off the head, burn the body, burn the head. Little worms will crawl out of the pyre. You have to kill the worms that are coming out of the pyre. And then you have to take half of the.
But none of us ever removed the heart. Never has ever removed the heart, which is. That's what I think.
No,
I think they were just trying to be folklore. I think they were just trying to be folkloric about it. That's my general sense.
It didn't bother me that much. It's entirely possible that he didn't stake her enough. He just because the wood itself. Two things: you stake the heart, the vampire in theory dies. But wood is supposed to be. Wood is folkloric. Wood is related to the Christian. The Christian faith, and so vampires are going to hurt if you stake them with wood, regardless whether you destroy their heart. I can live with that. But Mina, before all of that, Mina dies, and it's terrible. Mina is in bed and she can't breathe, and she just dies right in front of him. It's a very scary scene. So anyway, she dies, and they send a letter to Van Helsing and say, "Hey, Van Helsing, your daughter has died. Please come." I don't know. Come,
deal with body.
Yeah, come deal with it. And so in comes, Laurence Olivier as Ben. And Laurence Olivier is I think, I have no idea how old he is. How old is Laurence Olivier here, anyway?
I don't know. I can pull it up here. Hang on a second. But anyway, like I said, he was super ill, and apparently he has this, like, bleeding problem where if he even gets nicked a little bit, he bleeds profusely. So it's kind of interesting that he plays this role. Let's see. What year is it? It's 1979?
1979.
Okay, and he is born in, I'm pulling that up, 1907. So that would be 72 years old that he would be.
72. So, look, he's a very sick 72 because there's a lot of... well,
that's what I said. They said he was really ill during the making of the film.
Yeah. But he brings... He brings a lot of pathos to it and a lot of wisdom. They don't really ever establish Van Helsing the way they do sort of in the book as this guy who spent a lot of time studying vampires and other things. He just walks in and has a lot of knowledge.
You know what, they do kind of portray him, in my opinion, as a guy who's a scholar. And so he's going to be just a dude who figures it all out, no matter what.
Yes.
And that's kind of his saving grace. And he's pretty open-minded. Like, as soon as he sees, oh, hey, he's a vampire, he's like, well, I guess that's what he is. Because here's all the evidence,
Well, I like the fact that he's Mina. I mean, even though it breaks the book, I like the fact that he is Mina's father because it does give him more of an emotional connection as to why he would want to hunt down Dracula, rather than just being kind of this roving vampire hunting badass like he is in a lot of movies.
No, you're right. It gives it real personal, personal feeling. I don't know if you were going to say this, but the scene where he actually does have to go hunting after Mina is terrifying at first, and then also very sad. But we've talked about the Bloofer lady before, right? Almost every Dracula movie has one where Mina here, Lucy and the other ones. Mina comes back looking for usually children at first, and so Van Helsing immediately leads them to Mina's tomb, and he discovers, and this is the neatest thing, I've never seen this before. He discovers the coffin that she was buried in has a false bottom. Basically, it just opens up into the mines below, and he goes down there, and she's this extraordinarily terrifying wraith creature. Yeah, she's got pockmarks all over her face. Her eyes are rimmed with redness, and they're black and beady, and she's calling him Papa, and it's just
creepy.
It's revolting. It's revolting and scary, and a really great scene.
That reminds me.
It's also very sad.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That reminds me, though. Also, I thought it was so weird how they chose to make, like, all of that has a lot of contrast because they chose to make the movie very monochrome.
Yes.
Like, it's a weird, like, it's almost black and white for most of the movie.
There's something about that, Tony. Go ahead, make your point, and then I have a tidbit on this.
No, I just thought it was an interesting choice.
Well, as it happens, this is not the way the movie was color timed when it came out in the theaters. This is the way John Badham wanted it to be color timed, and so how it was re-released for Laserdisc and then DVD. But originally, it was a lot more colorful. And
that makes sense because I think the print that we saw before wasn't color timed this way, right? And I wondered if I was just remembering it wrong. Oh,
right.
Okay, well that's good.
Because we saw a 16mm print at the Alamo Draft House, and I remember there being a lot of yellow and bright colors, and especially for the.
I'm glad I wasn't just crazy then. That's interesting. But it is really.
Well, there are people who are upset about that because there are people who are like, why is John Badham, without really telling anybody, reaching in and deliberately reaching all the color out of a movie that's already been released?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, because they didn't let. Oh crap! Why am I drawing a blank? The Mist, was supposed to be in black and white, and that's what they wanted.
Which one?
But The Mist.
Oh yeah, The Mist. Yes.
But you can, and I actually, because the director wanted it to be black and white, I actually just watched the black and white, which is a special features disc, and not the normal disc. And the studio was like, no way. So I think it's interesting that studio was like, yeah, okay, you can recolor time it.
Yes.
I mean, it's like it's neat. I think it's neat colored, like so muted.
Well, the colors are fascinating. I mean, you're right. You think of the funeral of Nina is just so beautifully colored. You know, there's because you've got the white of the tombstones and the gray and black of everybody's clothes, and this universe that these people live in is one of the foggiest, sort of most bone-bleached just places.
Yeah. Oh, man, and there are some scary-looking characters at that funeral, too. Holy moly.
It's interesting to think that because, you know, my history with this movie is, you know, it was on TBS a lot when I was a kid. And, you know, like the scene where, you know, Dracula's crawling down the side of the thing, the building and then outside the window. That, like, if you know, like, a lot of people in my age group who grew up in the 80s, like, they will recall that as something that was creepy to them.
Oh, hell
and,
yeah.
You know,
It's creepy today.
I don't think of, you know, the color saturation, you know, being that different from what I remember. So it is kind of weird that you're pointing that out now, because I watch it now, and it is kind of as I remember the movie being as a child.
I remember more reds. But it is possible, Drew, also that we've been hypnotized by this. You know, that we're aware of it, and so then we play it up. It would be cool to go on the web and find somebody, and I don't know if this exists or not, who can compare scene to scene and show you. Because I remember some more reds. I remember, you know, some brighter yellows. But that scene where Dracula is crawling on the wall, I think my favorite moment there is, you know, Dracula's doing his crawling thing, which is also from the book, and he actually crawls past the camera and looks at the camera for a second. It's the best.
That is a great effect.
By the way,
it's such a traditional Hollywood effect of just like turning, you know, just having them crawling on the floor and having it be a set of like, you know, like a side of them. But it looks so cool. Even though we all know how it's done and it's like the cheesiest thing, it looks really cool and effective.
Well, he really sells it, you know, with his body language.
Yeah, It looks great. I mean, then there's so many good Dracula moments, like when he's on his horse, and when he actually even asks to come into the graveyard. Like, it's just little bits. And it's weird because some things they're really like, I was always a little bit confused, and maybe, I don't know why, but like, you know, he's affected by Van Helsing early on, but then the cross later on, I guess he's just in his element and he can set it on fire.
I think it's because it's Van Helsing, and Van Helsing has a strong will, and Jonathan Harker is weak-willed.
Yeah, well, weak all over.
That's pretty great. When Jonathan Harker holds up a cross and Dracula just goes,
again, I think everybody's just tired of him. Look, he can't even hold up a cross.
Well, when you think about it, too, like Van Helsing just has kind of like a little cross, and he's able to ward him off. Like Jonathan Harker has this giant, you know, wood plank cross that doesn't do much of anything.
Well, in other films, we talked about how you had to have faith behind it. That was part of the deal, was that you had to have faith, and so maybe Jonathan Harker doesn't have any faith. And then my question is, when they go and see Lucy in the asylum, at first the cross affects her, and then suddenly she's able to hug it. So it's almost like she herself switches.
Well, I have a read on that
between her vampire persona and her human persona.
I mean, my feeling there. So that's true. Lucy has begun to fall under Dracula's spell. They throw Lucy in the asylum, and then Jonathan Harker goes in to talk to her. And at first, she is very much on Dracula's side. And then when she kind of comes out of the spell, she does hug the cross. And this is one of those things where, in a sense, you can take the movie as a tale of a rivalry between two powerful cults. There's the cult of vampirism and there's the cult of Christianity. And they are essentially vying for this person. They're in battle, at least over this person. And Lucy comes from the cult of Christianity, and so she is more likely to remain there, and it's where she's most at home, but she's being won over. And you get the feeling, if you think about it from Dracula's perspective, he is at the top of the heap, and he is going to win people over to his, to his side, and he's in competition for these people, and there's no reason to think that he's not winning. I have one.
I don't think it does that as much as the actual, like I said before, the classism, like how striated everything is. I think the cult the cult of each may weave into that, but it's still very like the whole thing is stratified. And
no, you're right. That's a really good point.
Even
I never really thought about
her upselling to being Dracula's concubine.
She's trading.
Well,
up.
even Jonathan even says a line like, "Oh, well, I guess I won't be good enough now that you're hobnobbing with the likes of royalty."
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and that's got to be true, right? I mean, that's it's hard to argue with that, especially in this time when even though Lucy talks about how she has her own will and she's not chattel, being realistic, this is a count. And it's a very charming count. It's not as though he comes off badly. He comes off very well. He plays everything right when it comes to the dating with Lucy. Now I have one quibble that is just going to be geeky. This is the one geeky thing that I'm going to throw out in this whole thing, and that is that Dracula says to Lucy, "You will be my best beloved one," and we'll cross the oceans together and all that good stuff. Now, I think it's really important to remember that, just like a lot of lines in this movie, that is a lift from the book. But that is not what he says in the book. In the book, he says, "And you, their best beloved one, are now to me flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, kin of my kin, yada, yada, yada. You shall be avenged in turn, for not one of them but shall minister to your needs." And, in other words, in the book, he wants this character because she is so important to them. It has nothing to do with her at all. Whereas in this movie, she seems to measure up, and he wants to be with her. And I'm always fascinated by that, how that little twist, my best beloved one versus their best beloved one, happens depending on which way the movie's going to go. If it's a love story, it becomes my best beloved one. But if it's just he's a bad guy, then it's taking in the same way that he might take anything that's important to them, because he's just a jerk.
Right.
So.
Yeah, he's a user, man. And what's funny too is I think going back to the faith thing. It's a geeky horror movie person thing. Is like, why do the crosses affect him? But then he's like, just running his horse around the cemetery, and none of the crosses in the cemetery work. Because he asks for permission to come into the cemetery. I always kind of like, well, he gets a little bit of a pass. It's kind of why does Mina show up in the water when she has no reflection as a vampire? And it's like, well, because there's a cross in the water. Right.
Very good.
That kind of thing.
That's the answer they invented. And by the way, it's because it's the best shot in the whole movie is where Laurence Olivier drops his cross into the puddle, and he feels around for it, and he loses the cross, and then he sees his daughter's, the reflection just congeal in the water there, and that's a wonderful scene. But they don't cast reflections vampires, and so Bad Adam said, well, it'll work okay this time because he dropped the cross in the water, and so the water is now sanctified. So,
it is an awesome scene. No matter what, even if it was a mistake, like it's a wanky answer to be sure, but I mean, the shot is beautiful, so you forgive it.
The other scenes I like. The other scene I liked is the car and horse and carriage chase, which I thought was really interesting.
Well, so let's get to that so that we can move towards the end in our final thoughts. So yes, go ahead. What?
This movie, I have to say, also seems like it's set about 5 to 10 years after the traditional setting to Dracula in my mind. Like it seems more Edwardian.
They have cars, right?
Victorian.
Everybody has cars.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, it is. You said it exactly right. It's set in the early 1900s instead of the late 1800s. One thing that gets you, by the way, besides cars, is it gets you blood typing. So,
gets you what?
By the time this movie takes place, they actually knew about blood type, so you could do blood transfusions without accidentally killing the person you're doing the transfusion with if you got that wrong. which the original Dracula takes place in the 1890s when they knew about transfusion but not about blood typing, and that's just something that always bothers people, is that that maybe they hasten Lucy's death by just everybody giving them her blood without any thought whatsoever to blood types. So yes, it is it's one of the few Edwardian Draculas, and I guess that's just the way Edward Gorey drew it when he designed the play. And this movie is really, in a sense, an adaptation of the revival of the play that had all the Edward Gorey designs on stage, none of which got used in the movie. But yeah, that's a really good point, Drew. And it took me years to even notice that, that they're not dressed like normal Dracula cast. So the whole movie rattles towards this. The finale, which is basically a big chase. Dracula seizes Lucy. I mean, like Superman. I mean, he bashes through the wall like the Hulk and kills Renfield, who, to Tony's point about class, is always this lower class guy who's just everybody's mean to and who isn't worth a great deal. And so he kills Renfield, and then he seizes Lucy and he bashes his way back out the brick wall like Superman. And then they're in a chase. They're in a chase with a bewitched carriage, where Dracula's taking control of the horses, and Jonathan Harker and the good guys are chasing after them in his little early car. And the chase goes all the way to Scarborough. Yes, they go to Scarborough, where Dracula is already on board a Russian vessel headed for Romania because he's going back to Castle Dracula. And this is actually the way almost all the Dracula movies end, is in the chase scene. Although often, if you look at like the Coppola movie and the book, the chase goes for a long, long time, and they eventually make it all the way back to the castle. But since this movie is very much like the play and kind of all has to take place very close to everything else, they catch up to Dracula on the water, as Julia pointed out, in a sail chase. They get in another ship, they go over to the Russian ship, they get on board. The Russians go, "What are you doing getting on board?" And Van Helsing goes, "You got vampires." And they go, "Okay, go do what you think you got to do."
And then none of them goes downstairs to check what's going on. That's what gets me. Is that all this battle is happening downstairs, and there's not a single crew guy that kind of pops his head and he goes, "Everything okay down here?"
Everything okay? No, he said there's vampires, and so they're not going anywhere. And yeah, you're right. Van Helsing could be Danny Ocean. He could be stealing everything they have in their ship, and they're just like all frozen because he said, "Oh, there's vampires in your hold." And but they go down. They open up the coffin. Lucy is all vamped out. Dracula's never vamped out. That this effect only happens on the vampires that are younger than him. She's all like cuddled up against him. It's really cute. Yes, yes, that'd be a great screenshot. And they get into this fight with Dracula, and it's exactly the way that Tony, were you pointing this out? That oh no, it was Julia. That Dracula basically makes mincemeat of them. I mean, they can't fight Dracula, and it's absurd. Van Helsing tries to stake Dracula. Dracula just stabs him with his stake and sticks him to the wall. I can't even remember what happens to. Oh yeah, Harker tries to shoot him several times. And this is again like Superman, and basically Dracula just sort of stares at him, not even in a sort of regal vampire way, but more like a "you can't be serious" way, when Harker just keeps, unloads his gun into Dracula. And the winner of the whole thing is the dying Van Helsing, who, how did this happen? Van Helsing is the one in the end who sends the hook into Dracula's back. It's a hook for like.
And they hoist them out into the sun.
Yes. Well, I mean,
it's a hoist for like. They make a point of him saying like, "Hey, I didn't think, they had a great line where he goes, "Hey, I didn't think you would, be able to stay in daylight." He's like, "Well, it's always daylight somewhere."
It's always daylight somewhere. Yes.
And I was like, "Oh man!" But then later on, he is affected by the sunlight. So.
Well, he says it's always nighttime somewhere or whatever. But he goes, "I need my rest. After then, I just need to stay indoors." So he's allergic to the direct sun. And so they hook him in the back. Van Helsing, the dying old man, all right, who is, by the way, only 3 years younger than Frank Langella is now. But the Van Helsing, the dying old man, sends a hook into Dracula's back, and then Harker, he, basically hauls Dracula up to the top of the mast, and Dracula is, torn apart slowly by the sun. And I wasn't. What did you think about this sequence where he's thrashing around in the sunlight? Anyone?
I don't know. It works. It's not perhaps the best special effect ever, but I don't know.
Best
it works
makeout
for me.
Frank Langella hated this. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like it's a character moment. It's great because it's the only time I think we still see Dracula's real personality, where he's just kind of this thing thrashing about on a hook.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow, I like how you said that. A thing thrashing about on a hook. Yeah, he's enraged, and he's dissolving, and his skin is peeling away. And so then we're supposed to be satisfied with that, and we cut away to Lucy, who is, sort of coming out of his spell, I suppose. And then all of a sudden you hear this, this noise, and then we see his cape sort of flittering away.
It was quite like the kite, like the old plastic kite that we had with the eyeballs. The
the black
plastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like plastic kite you can get at any 7-Eleven or Walmart or dime store or whatever with the 2 eyes. It looks like that. That's what I kept thinking of when I saw it flapping away. I love Lucy's expression of awesome, my lover may still be alive, and she has this serene and just happy look, wow, maybe we can be together. And that's just, it's a really cool character moment, and also really chilling. Even after death, or maybe death, she's at first oh, I'm back to being me, and then we notice not really. Dracula still has a hold of her, and that it's cool, and it's just chilling.
This is something that we can debate about forever.
She's such a good actor too. She sells that moment so well. Yeah, and I think that's pretty awesome.
I think within the logic of the way that Dracula's powers have been shown through the whole movie, it seems as though he would have enough power to turn into whatever he wanted to. So I think we can assume that the cape is just an indication that he got away. However, you could, in theory, read it the other way and assume that the cape is all that's left, and that Dracula just turned to dust and the cape flew away. But I don't think so. I think that.
If I may offer up a third read, maybe Lucy is going to carry on, the sort of bloodline of Dracula when she continues, upon death, may become a vampire still.
No. Yeah, no, that is a good read. It's hard to say. I guess I'm inclined to, but I think he gets away. Okay, so let's give our final thoughts on Dracula 1979, and then let's come around to do endorsements. And I think we went Drew, Tony, Julia, and me. So final thoughts, Dracula 1979. Drew, what do you want to leave us with that we haven't talked about, or however else you want to do it?
This is a great film. It's often overlooked, and I feel like Universal is arguably the most celebrated studio when it comes to making horror films, and this is often a forgotten gem in their vaults. And I think if you are a fan of vampire movies or just a fan of the Universal monsters, this is something you need to add to your library, or at least add to your cinematic vocabulary. It's a great film. The cast is great. It's gorgeous, and it gives you just a lot to talk about.
Excellent. Was it Drew then Tony or Drew then Julia? Okay.
I was last.
Tony. Oh, okay. Tony, final thoughts, Dracula?
Yeah, like I said before, I really enjoy it, and I always forget just how cool it is when I haven't seen it in a while. And Dracula is just so powerful, and I agree with Julia. He may not be the sexiest of the vampires, but he's certainly one of the most powerful, and just his presence, like Langella's presence, is really pretty awesome in this, and the way he sells, I'm so much above just the human race, and keeps that going, not just because it started, of course, because he was a count, or a king, but he's so much past that now. And just so many good touches with just what they keep in the folklore, what they change, even though they've changed a lot. They set it in it's within it seems like a mile radius, and yet it still works. All of that, even the names, it is a little bit weird when I was typing them and I kept switching them up. That works. I think it's pretty awesome, and I do think it's underappreciated when we talk about Dracula movies. More people should see this. And again, I think I now have to go back and look now that you mentioned the color timing, because I thought I was just crazy. So I need to. We've got
to look online and see if there's any documentation for that. There's got to be more. Julia, final thoughts, Dracula?
Oh, I already said, everything that I wanted to say. It was a fun movie. I recommend it. A couple little things here and there, but otherwise, a great experience.
Okay, my final thoughts. There are a bunch of things to look for in this movie that are really great. There's Dracula riding out of the fog in his horse. There's the great scene where Van Helsing faces Dracula and he says, you people are nothing compared to me. I'm the king of my kind. When you're gone, 100 years after you're gone, I'll still be here. There's that just extreme magnificence of Dracula in this movie. It's a fine film, and I had forgotten it for many years, and I'm really glad I had a chance to go back and look at it. So also I got to say, this is our 50th episode.
Yay!
Awesome.
Happy 50th.
There's actually, we did record a first episode that didn't actually ever go up. It was sort of a dress rehearsal where we did the 1992 Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola, and we had recording errors, which is the way those things work. So I think it's long gone. Drew was asking me, hey, do you still have it? And I'm afraid that I don't. So we said different things about that movie. In other words, we could take any movie that we've done over the past year and a half or whatever it is and record it again and probably come out with totally different stuff, which is one of the things I've really liked about
and also we just do them backwards, back down to 50.
Yeah, when we come back to, I don't know, some of the stuff we're going to do next, we may come around to movies that we've done before, and we may think about spending a few minutes talking about before. Okay, why don't we do endorsements? Drew, Tony, Julia, and Jason. Drew, you have anything for us?
Well, oddly enough, I have another Frank Langella movie I am endorsing this week. It is called Robot and Frank, and it is kind of a lo-fi sci-fi comedy about Frank Langella, who is, as you pointed out now, an elderly citizen, and it takes place in the near future where people have robot servants, and Frank Langella's character is an aging jewel thief with Alzheimer's. And he is given a robot to take care of him by his son, who's kind of just tired of driving back and forth from the city to take care of him. And it just becomes this fascinating character piece and this interesting meditation on aging. And it's a beautiful movie. It's funny. It's touching. And Frank Langella is, if I may say, as good in this as he is in Dracula, but in a completely different kind of role.
That is really amazing. Okay. Tony, endorsements?
Yes. Actually, as far as media goes, we started watching on Netflix Once Upon a Time, which I didn't really think was going to be all I was like, well, let's just watch an episode. It's actually really good. I mean, with TV, your mileage may vary, but I actually was really pleasantly surprised. Sometimes I think their budget is exceeded by their scope in the effects department, which I'm picky about, but I think it's really cool. As far as other stuff, and I don't know, Drew, are you going to be there as well at the Austin Nerd Cave Showcase?
I am.
On the 7th at Tribes Comics.
Both Jamie and myself are going to be there because we will be repping Halloween Man and Daedra Cakes at that.
Awesome. And that's going to be at Tribe Comics and Games on the 7th. So that'll be really, really cool. And I'll be repping SciComm and bringing what I have of Clockworks to kind of drum up some support because it comes out in June. So, so that's my endorsements.
Julia, do you have anything to endorse for us?
Yes, I would like to endorse my other podcast, which is, like you said, the Pod Moms, which is available on iTunes and through TalkShoe, which is what we have here, and then we have a Facebook page. And we had talked last week about, or earlier this week, I guess it was, about overprotective parenting versus, or protective parenting versus sort of permissive parenting. So, and then this next one we're going to do is the special parenting kids with special needs. So if you are a parent and you're interested in that, look that up, please. And the other thing I want to say is my kids watched The Croods this weekend. I did not watch that, but they really enjoyed it. But what I have seen is that we got this book from Titan called The Art of the Croods, and it's this really great hardback art book about just how they make the art there and like the history of it and the whole. I mean, it's just a really interesting book, and it's there's a lot of neat pieces to it. It's very beautifully put together. So if you like to collect art books, that's a pretty cool one. And like I said, the kids really enjoyed the movie and came back telling me everything there was to know about the history of man and animals and all that stuff. So I think they've learned a lot. So yeah.
Outstanding. Those Titan art books are really cool, by the way. I think that one's like number one in animation right now on Amazon. But The Croods is directed by the guy who was behind Lilo and Stitch, and he left Disney and went over to DreamWorks.
Yeah, Sophia noticed that. Our daughter noticed that right away. She's like, "This art looks just like Lilo and Stitch."
That rocks. That's really cool. All right, my endorsement actually goes back a ways, but it would be John J. Muth's Dracula, the graphic novel, which has been printed a bunch of times. You can find it all over the place. You can certainly find it on Amazon. But John J. Muth is he originally published it as one of the Marvel graphic novel series, but it's a book of watercolors. It doesn't have any word balloons. All the words are on the opposite, the facing pages of the art. And it's all watercolor, and it's inspired heavily by this Dracula and also Werner Herzog's Nosferatu. It has that look, very sort of seaside, gray, beautiful, just gorgeous, gorgeous artwork. So if you haven't picked it up or haven't picked it up recently, John J. Muth's Dracula is just a fantastic graphic novel and goes well if you're going to watch this movie. If you're going to get somebody an interesting Easter gift, you could get them, Dracula with Frank Langella and John J. Muth's Dracula. I don't know.
One more.
Well, it is rising from the dead.
Geeky,
the resurrection. Yes. Go ahead.
One more geeky endorsement, and this is totally self-serving and may, if it's loosely within the geekiness realm, though, is one of my favorite artists who was the original artist on Mobile Suit Gundam from 79. Which, 79. That ties it back enough, right? They've just Vertical has just put out the first edition of Gundam the Origin, which Viz did way back, and it's a retelling of the Gundam series. But Gundam the Origin now is in these really nice hardcover books with color pages, and this may be totally self-serving because Viz never completed it, and I'm hoping that enough people buy Gundam the Origin along with me so that all 10 or 11 hardcovers come out, and they are beautiful books. Like, I'm jealous because there was a snafu on my end, and I'm not getting mine until later this week. But I have the Japanese edition. Like, when I went to Japan, I found a good copy of it, and these hardcover Gundam books are amazing. And it's one of my favorite artists, just in general. So I'm hoping that if you're also a graphic novel geek and you happen to like robots as well, you will not be disappointed by Vertical's Gundam the Origin hardcovers, because it's something else.
I think for people, when they watch Pacific Rim this summer, it'll be probably, for a lot of folks, their first exposure to Gundam-style giant robots. So that was not intended to be a pun.
When that song first came out, we thought it was Gundam style, and we were like, cool.
And I wish it were Gundam style.
Yeah,
so
that would be worth
right.
for me.
Guess what we have coming up? Next, we have coming up a Dark Shadows retrospective, where we're going to do the 3 Dark Shadows movies, and maybe, if the guys will let me, also the Dan Curtis Dracula. I think that would make sense, because that's by the same guys who made Dark Shadows, and it was made right after Dark Shadows went off the air. So I think it would be a one way to shoehorn Jack Palance's Dracula into all of this. And then after the Dark Shadows retrospective, we're going to do comedy horror retrospectives. So we'll finally get around to stuff like Young Frankenstein and who knows what else. So I'm going to make these guys suffer through some Dark Shadows. So,
well, the only one I think I'll suffer through is the Tim Burton one.
All right then. Have you guys seen any of the old the movies, the Dark Shadows theatrical films?
Well, I've seen the show. I've never seen any of the movies, so I'm actually curious about those. Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of the show because I got some DVDs that collect storylines of the show, but there were 2 theatrical films back in the 70s, and then of course the Dan Curtis Dracula, and then and Dan Curtis made Dark Shadows, and then the Tim Burton one. So that'll keep us busy. All right, I can't wait. Thanks, everybody. Like us on Facebook, like us on iTunes, tell your friends. We want to hear your comments, complaints, harassment, whatever you want to do. And we will be back, with any luck, very soon, maybe even next week. And thanks, everybody. Thanks for the 50th. Thanks for a lot of fun.
Good night.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah.
Happy anniversary. Bye.